All right, April. So we're going to do some Python today. Yes?
Yes, we are doing Python, and specifically for those of you who, if you have Python experience, great. If not, it's okay. This is a nice introduction to where you can go and place your code, and that's going to be inside Visual Studio Code.
Rock and roll. Let's do it.
All right, so let's get started, everyone. Here on the screen, I have the Visual Studio Code website. So you can find the Visual Studio Code download as well as the documentation by visiting code.visualstudio.com. The homepage has a handy download button. However, if you want to explore versions for other platforms, you can always select download in the top right, and then you'll have for Windows as well as Linux and Mac. Once you have that downloaded, you are set and ready to start coding in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to give you a quick little tour of what's happening in here before we head into some Python, just in case it's your first time seeing the editor. So starting out with this far left area to the far left, that's going to be the activity bar. That activity bar has various icons in there, and those icons all represent different views that are available. If I were to select a view, it'll show here to the right, which is going to be the sidebar. And so depending on which one I select, right now I'm in Explorer, I can see all the files within the folder that I happen to have open. If I were to navigate, let's say, to run and debug, then I would be able to see what's happening with the debugger. Here in the middle is where I actually have the editor itself, where you can actually go and edit files. You can have multiple windows open, if you will, for the editor, and you can group them together as well. Very convenient for those of you who do want to keep things a bit more organized in VS Code. And then down below, just below the editor, I have panels. I can move these around. Down here is commonly where you're going to find the terminal as well. And you can have multiple terminals, and we'll do some work in the terminal here in just a bit. Then at the very bottom, this blue bar is where I have the status bar. So at that bar is where you're going to have different information with regards to the files that you may have open. And also, if you happen to have any extensions installed, and we'll talk about the extensions in just a bit, you may have some additional activity that's happening down there as well. So that's a quick guide around what Visual Studio Code looks like in terms of the interface. So you do have some options in terms of customizations that you can add, if you will, to the editor. And so whether you want to move around different panels, whether you want to change the color themes, for example, right now I'm in dark mode. However, there are a variety of themes available, especially from the community that have contributed them as well. So you can always add that to the editor just to jazz things up a bit. But as for the Python piece, let's head into the extensions marketplace. So the extension marketplace is where you're going to be able to find additional, let's call it, features that you can add to the editor to really enhance your experience. So within here is where you'll be able to find the Python extension. And the Python extension is what's going to provide additional support and functionality for programming in Python and Visual Studio Code. So Microsoft has their own Python extension. Within the extension view, if you search for Python, it will, let me pull this down. It'll show more information about the extension itself. There's some documentation that might be helpful for you. But most important, what we'll want to do here at the top is install it. I happen to already have it installed. So if you don't have it installed, it'll be an install button right around below the title where you can select that, and it'll do the install. Okay, so that is the extension. Now, the extension itself, like all extensions, also have some settings that you can change to make things more suitable for your needs. So if you're brand new to Python, this might not be something that's going to be as impactful. But if you have been using Python for a while and you're familiar with concepts such as formatters, for example, or linters, that's where the settings will come in handy. What I recommend is that if this is your very first time using the Python extension in Visual Studio Code, program first, and then once you're comfortable, that's when I would say go in and make those changes. But if you're curious as to where that is, if you go to File, Preferences, and then Settings, there's an entire section on extensions. You can also search for Python at the top. And then within the Python section, this is where you can find different settings. So the default interpreter, for example, which we'll touch upon in just a second, as well as I mentioned formatters and linters as well. So now that we have the Python extension, we're just about ready to look at some code, but I did mention interpreters. So what you're going to need to have is an interpreter selected in Visual Studio Code to start doing some programming with Python. I happen to be using Python 3.8.5 at the moment, but that's not the one that I have to use. For the interpreter, if you don't have one selected, in the bottom left corner of the screen, you're going to have a option to select an interpreter. If you see that, then click it, or if in my case, I already have one selected. By selecting that, I didn't have the opportunity to select an interpreter. I can also define the interpreter's path as well if I have it somewhere else on my computer. So you can select that. Also, while we're in here, you can also, as a heads up, you can also have virtual environments as well as Conda environments. If you happen to have either or, that's also going to show up here in the interpreter too. So there's another way. You can also access the interpreter, and it's probably one thing that I love about VS Code is that there's so many ways to do the same thing, which is great. It's just a matter of what's your personal preference. But with that said, you can use the command palette. That'll be Control-Shift-P. There's a lot happening here in the command palette, and it provides another way to get to something or access something or execute a command with the shortcuts. So outside of the interpreter option, as I have here, as something recently used, with regards to the Python extension, if you type in Python in there, there's just a wealth of other commands available too. So that's just a little quick tip with regards to the command palette.
So April, when you say the interpreter, that's just a Python installation, right? This has always been confusing for me, is that it's called an interpreter, but it's just Python, right?
Yep, that's what it's going to be. And I know in the past I've had like another version installed. And so if you happen to have multiple versions installed for whatever your project needs seem to be, you can also select a different one. But for me right now, I just have 3.8. I know on my other computer, I had 2 different versions. And
why does it end up installed in so many different places is my other question. Like if you go back to your interpreter, there's Python in 2 entirely different places.
Yes. Definitely is. Very good question. I don't quite actually have the answer to that one. I'm trying to think when I feel that I ran into that once actually, and it might have been a matter of where I selected during the install process or the download process. But in terms of a default action of why I would store elsewhere, not sure, Burke, to be honest with you. But
yeah, it's interesting. On mine, if I select the interpreter, there's like 9, and I don't remember installing any of them, and they're just all over the place.
Yeah, I feel the reasons vary. I know for me, as I have on my screen right now, I have the 64-bit in one place, and then I have the 32-bit in another place.
Gotcha.
Yep. All righty. Yeah, go ahead. Oops, there we go. What'd you say?
I was telling chat, there's no wrong way to do it. Just put your Python wherever you like.
Yeah. All righty. So speaking of Python, let's actually now get into some code. So on the left here, where I have the sidebar, these are the files that I have in a folder that's been set up. And I'm going to open the Hello World file that I have here. So within this Hello World file, it's a very short 2 lines of code. I have a variable MSG that stands for message, and assigned to it is the string hello world, and then we're going to print that variable. So there's different ways you can go about running this in the terminal. At the top, you could select terminal, and then you can open a new one. And then from there, if you were to run, for example, towards at the top, you can run without debugging, so you have that option. There's also this play icon that'll also run in scripts as well. And then if you right-click in the editor, might be a little difficult to see on screens, shifted things a bit, but there's also an option there to run Python file in terminal. And then also, if you're more into writing commands, you can always do that in terminal as well. Personal favorite for me is going to be the play button. And I don't know, I just like it. So here I have the output, which is going to be hello world in this case. If there happens to be any problems down here in the terminal, they're going to show up in this problems area, just in case you're wondering, like, where do my problems go? So that's a beginning example of doing some coding in Python. Now I have another example here. I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to have a file that's called emoji _ demo for our purposes here today. So within here, I'm using the emoji package, which is going to enable me to have an output of an emoji for the code that I have here. So I'm going to import that. And then I have a print statement here. And what it's going to output is I, and then the red heart in Python for I love Python. So one thing I do want to point out is because I don't want to have a lot of packages just installed, if you will, on my computer, this will be a good opportunity to create a virtual environment or a Conda environment. So right now, if I were to try to run this, I'm going to have an error because that emoji module is not going to be found. So instead, what I can do is just create a virtual environment in my case, and I'm going to do that right now. And now it's been created. I named it .env. So Visual Studio Code is going to provide a notification bottom right, and it says that it notices a new virtual environment has been created, and do I want to select it for the workspace? So when that happens, I say yes, and then what you're going to notice is that in the bottom left side of the window, after I select yes, we're going to see that that interpreter has changed. So now below, I have the one that I created called .env. If I were to select it, it's also now an option here in the interpreters that I can select. So as you are creating virtual environments, same for Conda environments, they're going to display here. Now that I have that virtual environment created, I need to go ahead and activate it. So let me do that very quickly for everyone. Let me move my mouse. I have a typo. Activate that. All right. So now I have my virtual environment activated. I can tell because I have the name of the environment to the left. And so from here, I can go ahead and install emoji using pip install emoji. It's doing the installation. And now the moment of truth, if I were to click play, let's clear this out so that way we can better see it. If I were to click play now or run, now I have iHeart Python. So as you're trying to keep track of the different environments that you have, you'll be able to do that in that interpreter window that I showed. So I'm just going to go ahead and deactivate this while I'm here because I won't need it for my next examples.
So,
all
April,
right. Yeah.
While you're deactivating there, just real quick, this is an interesting question. If I don't want to see the path and extra lines when I print something, what can I do? Is it possible to just get the printed statement?
Ooh, good question. I feel like I may have done that in the past, but I don't remember top of my head. Have you done that, Burke?
Uh-huh.
How have you done it?
I've
seen it shortened for sure. And I've seen it, I've seen the beginning of or at the end of it, the little caret at the end changed as well before. Some people have used like an emoji at the end or like some sort of icon, or I just don't remember how to do it though.
Yeah, there's actually a VS Code. There's a video on YouTube that a fellow made about how to do this. And well, so we'll have to follow up on that, find it and link it in, but it is possible. I don't remember what it is. I think it's a command you have to actually run in your terminal to do that. So it's a command you have to give to Python. Let's see what else here. What else have we got? So here's one that's not directly related to Python, but Techie Shadow. Yeah. Techie Shadow wants to know, is there any way you will suggest to promote my coding tutorials and videos? No, I'm sorry, Techie Shadow. We cannot promote your tech tutorials and videos, but thank you for asking. All right, let's see. Just looking at what else is in the chat here. Okay, I think we're good. Just a lot of people saying how much they like VS Code and can we watch this video later? And yeah, all right.
All right. So see, we're coming up on time. One thing that I will have a moment to share, if that's okay, is IntelliSense. within Visual Studio Code. So IntelliSense is going to be useful tools for programming. You have code completion, object definition, location of objects, as well as variable declarations. So I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. It's a Visual Studio Code feature, but we are able to leverage what's available in that Python extension. So in here, I'm going to create a new file, clicking the plus button for a new document here in the Explorer. I'm going to call it circle.py. We're going to calculate the area of the circle with this one. And now my file is created. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'll take you through some of the IntelliSense features as I'm creating this particular script. But the first thing that I'm going to do is import the math module to help us out. So as I'm typing import, what's happening here is that I do have some suggestions and it can autocomplete when I'm writing. In this case, it's an import statement. So I'm just going to tab and now I have that there. Once I've done that, I can type M for the math module. And as I can see, I have a lot of different options available. And so this is really convenient, especially as you're starting to write more and more code. But in this case, I'll click math and I'm going to call it M. And now from here, I'm going to have a variable radius and I am going to set that, I'm going to convert that float. And now that I have this float, what I'm going to start getting now is definitions. And this is also going to start bringing in some information that you would find in reference documentation as well. Super convenient that it's brought to you in Visual Studio Code, because instead of having to go outside of the editor and have like your browser open in one place and then having the editor open in another screen, everything's going to be brought in here, which is super convenient. But I'm just going to go ahead and you'll see things pop up as I'm typing that. But once I have that in here, let's see how fast I can type. Come on. And then we're going to go ahead and print that. Okay. Control S to, oops, not shift. Control S. All right. So from here, assuming I didn't type anything incorrectly, when I run it, it's going to ask for the radius. Let's say it's going to be 4 if I press enter, and then I'll have my answer. So that was more to show what IntelliSense looks like in action. Now, there is one thing I do want to call out with regards to Jupyter Notebook support, especially for those of you who do things with Jupyter Notebook. And for those of you who may not be aware, there's a Visual Studio Code environment available by going to Visual Studio. Let me make sure I have the right URL, vscode.dev, and it's in the browser. So instead of downloading the actual editor to your computer and using it there locally, you can also use it in the web. There are some limitations, however, if you are programming in Python. One that I know for sure is going to be the Jupyter Notebook support. However, you can open your notebooks and create notebooks here within the editor if you do have the download version of Visual Studio Code. So that'll be the final thing I'll just share with you today with regards to what that experience is like in Visual Studio Code. But as I'm getting that set up, just to let you all know, you can also do some debugging in here as well as unit testing too. So what I have created so far or together is a notebook that I have. It's utilizing one of the Learn modules that we created for Space Jam: A New Legacy. And the output here is going to be some player stats. So like what you would find in a notebook, we have code cells, you can add them in here. We have kernel in here as well. You can run, oh, I think I ran everything, did not mean to do that. But you can run the cells individually. Nope, I didn't do that, perfect. So let me get rid of that. So you can run the cells individually, for example, and this one might take a little bit, there we go. And as you're running that, you can keep track of your variables as well. So right now, I do have variables that have appeared. I can open that up. And here in a new tab, this is where I can have all the variables that are available depending on where I am right now and running this notebook. The other thing I'm going to share after I run all is that if you do happen to have any visuals, such as Let's close this, such as graphs and such. At the very bottom, I have a box plot, for example. You can view those in the data viewer. If you click this icon, top left looks like a little graph. And here you can zoom in and out. Very convenient if you happen to have a lot happening on this screen. You can export your notebooks as well. You can also export these images as well in graphs. And then finally, if it's helpful for you, you can, let's see where, there's an option to also export the notebook into a Python file. So in case for those of you who are out there that works with notebooks, Jupyter Notebook support is available. Just do keep in mind that it's currently not available in the browser version of VS Code, but it's here if you happen to download to your computer. So I think we're at a point where I can take more questions, Burke.
All right, awesome. Crash course in Python and notebooks is a bonus. All right, so real quick, y'all, I'm going to paste in a link to a video from a gentleman named, what is his name? Make sure I get it right. It's Ronaldo Adolphe, and he has the answer on how to print out the Python. It's right there without all the other stuff. So it is some changes that he's making to VS Code to do that. He actually has 3 different ways to do it. So that answers that question there. All right, let's see. Chat. What is up? Let's see. Are there any shortcuts for nested parenthesis? What does that mean? To like,
I am assuming if you have your code and you want to format it so that way they're nested potentially, which then would likely be something more of a formatter that you would potentially use. The default in terms of formatters, that sounds more like a formatter response, but within Visual Studio Code, the default for the formatter is going to be, oh, I had it written down, where did it go? It's going to be AutoPep 8, and then the linter is going to be Pylint, in case you're wondering about that. But that might be more of a formatter, and you can do some editing there as well. Back in that settings section that I mentioned earlier, that's where you can do some settings for that. But I'm hoping that answered question.
My camera died there for a second. All right. What about this one, April? Here's a good one. I love the editor. I just got a small query while running Python on my Mac. VS Code by default uses Python 2. How can I modify VS Code to use the Python 3 version?
Yeah, how did I do this? Because I did all of, honestly, I did all my book on my Mac, believe it or not. So I ran into that as well. After downloading it, what I had to do is when I was working with my interpreter, I know I had to select a path where Python 3 is downloaded. And so coincidentally speaking about that interpreter area that we mentioned earlier. So that's where you're going to be able to set that. Also, back in that settings section that I mentioned earlier is where you can set the default path. Where is it? It's somewhere in here, but is it somewhere? It's somewhere, default interpreter path, it's there. So you can set that and hopefully that should help. I'm trying to think if that's what I did, because you don't want to delete the Python 2 from your Mac. That helps a couple other things run on your Mac. But I think that's how I was able to overcome that on there.
Here's an interesting question. IntelliSense and IntelliCode, they do sound quite similar.
They do sound very similar. Oh, goodness. So I know for IntelliSense, as I mentioned, that's going to be just different things that you can utilize around the areas of code completion. You have some object definition as well you can locate. But IntelliCode, very good question. I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, IntelliCode is kind of like GitHub Copilot. It's an AI assisted coding tool. So it kind of like watches what you're writing and then it tries to predict what you're going to write next. Right. And so if you are in JavaScript and you write console, you probably want to do console log. And so it will put log to the top of the list. So that's the difference. And IntelliSense is what April explained. So IntelliSense is something that's in Visual Studio Code. You'll use it all the time. IntelliCode is a plugin that you would install if you wanted to use that. Okay, let's see. So many questions. Chad, I want to get to all of them, but there's so many.
I have a notebooks question. Would you like for me to answer the notebooks question, Burke? The use
Yeah. Oh,
cases?
yeah. Thank you. Somebody put one up. Sorry, I'm not even.
No problem. So for notebooks, if you are doing a couple different use cases, if you are typically doing things around the realm of machine learning, for example, I've seen it used for, there's different data use cases. And essentially, people who are creating and using notebooks, it's a way for you to run your different scripts that you have. You are able to export your output as well, as I mentioned, like the graphics and the visuals earlier, into like PNGs and PDFs and FEGs, and you can incorporate that into any sort of research reports that you're doing. So I've seen it used in that instance. I've also honestly seen it used as a way for teachers to teach students how to use Python too, because they'll have everything set up in there already, and you can just run each cell and the output will display there. So I've personally seen it used in both of those instances. Have you seen it used in any other instances, Burke?
Yeah, I've seen it used outside of Python for, like, there's a GitHub issues notebook that we have where you can query GitHub repos. So if you're like us and you have a lot of open source, and you're trying to figure out what the status and how many open issues you have across repos, it's really good for that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a scratch pad for me. So, right, if I'm just trying to mess around with some code, I'm going straight to a notebook. I prefer that environment. Okay, let's see here. That's a great question. What else have we got? There's several questions on this, April. I saw at least.
Yeah. So
debug Python.
Do I have a quick moment, Burke, to show on the screen?
You're over time, but we're gonna do it anyway. We're gonna do it anyway.
Okay, we're gonna do it anyway, because lucky for everyone, I have something set up here. So with debugging, you're going to utilize the run in the debug view that's in here. And so what I have on the screen is a short, simple script that takes numbers in a list, and then it totals them, multiplies it by 2, gives you the output. So in here, you can set breakpoints. We have little red dots that appear. You can set them at different places. We're able to keep track of where breakpoints are located, variables as well. When you're ready to run things, you can do run and debug. You can select your configurations. We have a Python one if you're doing things with Django, as well as Flask, for example. There's different configurations available there, and you can modify those configurations too. Selecting Python file, if I go ahead, oops, it's already running. So as it starts, I can continue, I can step into. Those commands are going to be here at the top of the screen. So in this case, if I continue, I'm now into that function. Here on the left is where I'm keeping track, or the editor is keeping track of my variables. Down below, a little difficult to see, but I do have my breakpoints that are here in their locations with their line number. Stepping into this one, for example, let me keep going. Back at the top, I know this is like super quick, everyone, but back at the top now, as I'm keeping track of my variables, you're going to start seeing things change as I start to get new variables. So now I know what num is for that iteration, so on and so forth. So that's like super duper quick overview of how you can debug in VS Code for Python. I would suggest checking out the documentation for a more thorough deep dive into doing debugging with VS Code for Python. But there's a lot of functionality there. Even here on the screen as I have, you can also watch as well as you're doing the debugging. And we also have a debug console as well, where you can also enter as you are debugging. So super quick. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. So we're over time. There's so many comments for you here, April. Chat, I wish we could get to all of these questions here. Perhaps we need to have April back or do another. I think we definitely need to do more Python, is what I've learned from this. Y'all have been awesome. Thank you, April, for coming on the stream and sharing the Python with us. It was lovely to have you.
No problem.
All right, chat. So the only thing left for you to do is head over and grab April's book on Python. You're going to want to do that. It's going to look, there it is. It's going to look great on your bookshelf no matter what. And you're going to want to be back here next week, next Thursday, for the next live stream. So check that out, and we will see you then. Have a fantastic weekend, y'all. Bye.